Welcome back, everyone. I hope you also had your coffee and you feel rejuvenated for the second session. So we're back with Dr. Ieva Puzo. Dr. Puzo, or Ieva, is a social or cultural anthropologist. She has a master's in Asian studies from the University of Berkeley and a PhD in cultural anthropology from the University of Pittsburgh. Currently, she's a lecturer and senior researcher at Riga Stradinš University. I think I butchered that, but RSU, Faculty of Communication, and the head of the Social Anthropology Master's Program. Her interests are related to science and technology studies, the anthropology of work, and research on highly qualified staff mobility. She's particularly interested in the intersection between science as a field of research, work, how we think about work in today's world, and the movements of people across borders. Ieva, I leave the floor to you. Thank you for coming here all the way from Riga and joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you really to Asli and to Aysuda for the opportunity for me to be here. Actually, I was super excited to follow the Academic Freedom workshop that you organized last year on Zoom. So I'm super happy to be here, here for this event. It's kind of like a continuation, like a wonderful, result of the project, and I'm super excited to talk here today as well. So yes, I have a very, very simple PowerPoint. As an anthropologist,
we should actually initiate people into this anthropology.
It's kind of funny that I joke at this point. Let me see, but it's basically a very simple PowerPoint with a couple of quotes. Can you see the PowerPoint?
No, they can't, because we have to. Okay.
So I mean, it's not necessarily necessary. I mean, it's just like, do you think it would make sense to kind of?
I can do it while you start talking. I can.
Okay. We can now try that. So yes, basically, I will be speaking as an anthropologist.
So let's explain the joke. We misidentified Agatha as an anthropologist in the beginning, and that's been a running joke in the last 2-3 hours now.
I would also hear, the data that I discussed, the stuff that I discussed is ethnographic, autoethnographic, and maybe especially the kind of concluding part of my kind of short intervention is maybe more, doable for anthropologists, but that's up for a debate as well. So let's just start, and I would like to start with a kind of an ethnographic vignette from a phone conversation I had with a colleague, with a friend who is considered in the context of Latvian research landscape, a very successful scholar, because he works for a smaller independent research organization, and his organization is very successful at attracting all kinds of project funding. And we're having this conversation, and he says, well, I haven't been able to transform my income into security beyond a year and a half. And I keep chasing extra income because I don't know what's going to happen after that. And I'll return to this quote later, but I just wanted to kind of lay out this kind of, with this quote, this kind of tensions that come out in this Latvian research landscape, this notion of what it means to be successful, a successful researcher on the one hand, and on the other hand, how this perceived success may feel. So for a while now, social scientists have discussed how neoliberalization, financialization, and marketization have shaped research and teaching work around the world. They have examined how this process is accompanied by audit culture and bureaucratization, as well as, importantly, increased precarity for academic workers, which may take different shapes in various national contexts. And again, scholars have discussed these various forms in their work. In recent years, even various professional and advocacy organizations and even the OECD have raised alarm about the precarity of research careers, highlighting the need for reforms that would enhance employment stability. Scholars have also discussed the precarity of academic careers, how this precarity engenders various affective responses, like hope and hopelessness, usually hope followed by hopelessness, resentment, and importantly, anxiety. Anxiety in particular, and the various shapes it may take, such as stress, fear, exhaustion, pervades communities of academic workers. Okay, so you're around here. We can go to the Zoom. We go to the Zoom screen. Oh, all right. Can we make your screen?
No, you make
No, no.
BCD column.
BCD. Oh,
For people for the technicality.
yes.
BCD?
Yes, yeah. Okay, I'll just continue that.
So,
Yes, now sharing.
which
Third slide. I think we don't. Yeah. Well, I'll just go on, and if it happens, it happens. And not. Yeah. So the research workers in Latvia that I will be discussing today are what Černa Berković refers to as the projectariat. So basically, precariously employed scholars, and I'm one of them as well, who at the same time are comparatively privileged in relation to their peers because they have research project funding. While Berković focuses on the research and employment patterns of specifically anthropologists, in the fragmented European research landscape, her insights resonate beyond our discipline, and I hope to kind of unpack it a bit later. After all, as Andrew Grant argues, precarious work goes hand in hand with social organization through the project form. The project form, Grant suggests, quote, combines a logistical and a visionary, planning and promise, reason and hope. Thoroughly embedded in contemporary life world, the project form has emerged as a default model for human initiative of purposive, transformative action, end of quote. And contemporary academic work is no exception. Most of our work is organized through projects and operate in what Helena Ilioki calls project time, by which she means, quote, the inherent temporality of the project format. In project time, Ilioki posits, the future is included in the present. For instance, a research proposal where it's necessary to articulate what the results will be and what scientific and social impact they will have, like years ahead of time. And what and when counts as work is also shaped by the same project format and the same kind of logics of project time. So what intrigues me is the tension between the project form, the project format, with its temporary labor and effective implications, and encounters with the kind of unknown that scholars are supposed to pursue. And I'm often left to wonder what happens to what anthropologist Jane Guire has called our quote-unquote receptive attentiveness to various phenomena when we have to give equal, if not even more attentiveness to the bureaucratic frameworks of our endeavors, the financial and project time framings of what we are doing. To what extent can we say in good faith that our receptive attentiveness does not get shaped by the organization of our work lives? And when I say work lives, of course, I mean, I understand our work lives is obviously tied to all the other aspects of our lives, our care responsibilities, professional, personal relationships, civic commitments, time of rest, all kinds of other obligations to the self and others that we may have. And I suggest that the way we approach the unknown is directly shaped by our terms of employment, among which the project form is a particularly prevalent one, and the anxiety that it endangers. And now we'll talk a little bit about the academic precarity in the Latvian research context, just a couple of numbers. Yes. So Latvia, a country in the European East, with a population of approximately 1.9 million people, is a locale that's kind of on the edges of this academic knowledge production, whatever way we may refer to these edges. And having regained its independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, Latvia has been trying to kind of find its place in the global scene of knowledge production. Since the early 90s, there have been these kind of various, what my colleague Liana Ozolini has called controlling narratives guiding Latvia's research governance. First, in the 90s, there was this focus on westernization and returning to Europe and distancing the country from its Soviet past. Over time, early 2000s, there's this focus on knowledge economy, and now, of course, it's the narrative and discourse of global excellence. So we have to be part of this global research landscape, we have to be competitive and things like that. At the same time, Latvia's research and development spending is the lowest, among the very lowest in the European Union. So at 0.7% of GDP. The European average is 2.3%, to put it into comparison. And so this expenditure is expected to gradually rise by 2027, expected to rise to 1.5%, but in the current kind of geopolitical landscape, I'm not necessarily sure that that would happen. And to think about that, we have to go back to the economic crisis of 2008, when, as part of all kinds of austerity measures in the country, the national research and development spending in Latvia was reduced by 60%. And following that, there has been like a serious kind of dependency. The fact was that the dependency was created on EU structural funds. So basically, the Latvian research system is on the needle of EU funds. And both in terms of the available resources as well as discursively, project funding kind of came to be seen as the only way to carry out one's research work and get paid for it. And the project format had arrived in Latvia to stay, along with the understanding that competition for funding is now a necessity. So it's not that, you receive salary and get extra research funding. It's basically the idea that your salary is made from project funding. And all these factors have led to the fragmentation of academic careers and a paradoxical situation. So on the one hand, there's this kind of supposed lack of research workers. You could hear this narrative, but we don't have enough researchers. The career does not have high enough prestige. We don't have human resources. At the same time, most academic positions are not full-time. So and it's kind of part of this very strange
people or not enough
positions. Yes. So and again, then going back to the question of how these positions, if there are positions, are funded, the expectation that comes with having a position. And then most researchers working in the country are indeed members of, to mention before, the project area. Even World Bank representatives invited to consult the Latvian Ministry of Education and Science on the development of a new academic career model, posit that the fragmented career models has led to, quote, fragile arrangement for individuals, end of quote, and that academic careers in Latvia are a succession of individual jobs, which makes career planning difficult and academic careers less attractive. I mean, this is the World Bank saying these things, just to put it into perspective. So the next part, let's move on to the living the project life. So again, so this is the kind of
dream.
living the dream. So how how does this project life look like in practice, in reality? So Andrew Grant, in his strive to denaturalize the project format, suggests that it's also the realm of social theory, where the project logic needs to be decentered and what he calls provincialized. He argues that we have to think of human action outside the scope of projects and recognize that it may indeed be organized in more open-ended ways. And adding kind of to Grant's question of what kind of analysis are foreclosed by, quote, theories and that incorporate logics of the project form, end of quote, I want to give serious attention to the inquiry into what happens when the social analysis itself is carried out in the project form and under project conditions and project timeline. When thinking, data gathering, conceptualizing, writing, and rewriting, whenever all these things that we're doing takes place project time. And I do so by bringing together kind of two strands of insights. And first, maybe I kind of talk a little bit about the moments of anxiety in my own work as an anthropologist in Latvia, working in this project time in the framework of a specific research project that was carried out and managed in this kind of institutional framework of the university where I work and administered by one Latvian agency, funded by EU structural funds and open to financial and all kinds of audits by another agency, at least one. So, and the second, so it's basically my own kind of autoethnographic moments, the moments of anxiety that have kept me awake late at night. The second strand is constituted by various ethnographic and collegial encounters throughout my previous research project on the experiences of international scholars in Latvia. And here kind of center the conversations that happened in the margins and the kind of in the vicinity of my main research focus, as I basically try to understand the system within which both my research participants and I were working. And here I just have to mention that, Aysuda already mentioned that I'm originally from Latvia, but I did my master's degree and my PhD degree in the United States. So I was lucky to get this bit of to get a job in Latvia, at the university in Latvia, and I was really kind of along with my research participants was trying to figure out the system within which we all worked. And my goal here is not kind of to point fingers at specific institutions, public officials or university employees.
We want names.
Right.
Name and shame. We don't name.
It's very difficult to get to those names, actually. It should be another paper, basically how you try to locate the source of your issue, the source of your problems. And it's so decentralized, it's impossible to do.
That'd be great.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm not trying to kind of find the culprit here, but to kind of paint the larger picture and bring to the fore the tensions and at times, I think, what Graeber called structural violence that emerge in the relationships, encounters between various actors as they try to kind of fulfill all kinds of obligations, bureaucratic obligations engendered by the local manifestations of the project format. And these local manifestations being kind of adopted and adapted from this kind of EU structural EU framework. To put it into perspective, for instance, at an individual level, I'm incredibly thankful to the project manager that I had when I was doing my doctoral research project. Yes, I did have a project manager, and very kindly, I'm very thankful to him because very kindly every month, every quarter, every 6 months, and then a year and a half into the project, and then at the end of the project, he very kindly reminded me of all the report obligations that I had to do. So I had the So, and not every institution in Latvia does that, provide this kind of support. So, at a personal level, I was very thankful to him for the work that he is doing. Well, it was, it did take some time. At a systemic level, however, so the structural violence of the same report forms is quite real, as you can imagine, as I'm sure you have experienced yourself. And it takes time and effort to decipher them, to prepare them correctly, and even understand the source of power to which one is supposed to submit. And one of my interlocutors discussed how he and his colleagues had spent hours on one such form. I think we can go to the next. No, the bottom back. Yeah. No, the back. More. Yeah, this one. Yeah, thank you. And he said, well, when it comes to the financial reports, because we had like different kinds of reports.
Yes.
In the beginning, we went into details, reporting on each type of tax monthly, meaning that we reported monthly salaries, social contributions, income tax, employers' social tax, and so on for each quarter. It turned out that the agency didn't want any of that. All they wanted was the total amount. It's a pity that no one had told us. You know, like all this work that was put into kind of like, you know, this interpretive labor being put into figuring out the census power to which we're supposed to submit, and then realizing that it was all in vain. And in the process, the extent to which we can, as put by one of my research participants, learn to think like a bureaucrat matters. This learning is part of what Graeber refers to interpretive labor under the conditions of inconspicuous, omnipresent structural violence, investing time and effort into understanding those who seem to have bureaucratic power over us at any given moment. So while unable to locate the source of frustration of the exact problem, many scholars have the uneasy feeling that the bureaucratic burden seems to be more suffocating in the Latvian research context than in other national settings with which they have experience. Again, as part of in the first part of the workshop, we also touched upon this question of mobility, you know, mobility across borders, and research mobility, economic mobility, and people do have experience in other countries and other research institutions, and they get the sense that it's somewhat easier there, that like it's more suffocating in the Latvian context. So everyone has stories about how it's easier to accomplish this or that thing in other national research contexts. And one scholar referencing there's this kind of national desire, I would say, to have one or another Latvian research institution to appear higher in all kinds of university rankings. So, you know, university rectors talk about it, you know, administrators mostly talk about this is something that we need to achieve, that it's something that is desirable. And one scholar I talked to kind of really exclaimed, like, how, you know, what kind of top 500 can we talk about if you're not even allowed to work properly? Because, you know, we're so overburdened by these forms and work that we have to do to kind of figure these forms out and fill them up. So the deeply ingrained dependence on the EU structural funds and other EU research funding sources has created a system where scholars are anxious about fulfilling the administrative requirements outlined by their institutions, unsure about when the next funding cycle would be announced, and competing for scarce financial resources. The institutions, in turn, are concerned about managing research and research workers in line with the rules set out by government agencies and national laws. And then the government agencies are accountable to EU institutions to meet all the promised performance indicators, which may not have been realistic in the first place. So, for instance, again, this notion of, you know, having your work published in the right journals, indexed in the right databases, and it is something that many people and many institutions kind of base their work around anyway. And yeah, we can move on to the next slide. Just a very brief note that the pandemic exacerbated the already existing tensions, and it kind of made these tensions in the project or embedded in the project form kind of plays out in the Latvian context, made it more visible. So with the onset of the pandemic, many scholars funded by one particular grant program found themselves in an enviable position, quite literally not being able to carry out or complete the research projects within the kind of initially proposed timeline. And at the same time, not being given much leeway to change the original plans, because, you know, the project was written, it has a timeline, you have to comply with it. And I started hearing stories of project extension requests, non-financed, being denied. What struck most the scholars that I talked to, was getting these rejections in unsympathetic and bureaucratic language that did not much acknowledge the changed circumstances. So Latvia was in lockdown, people were told to work from home as much as possible, kids were attending school remotely, and one researcher with a few kids had received the following response to their project extension request. Nobody had canceled the workday, and that they should find ways to accomplish all the deliverables promised in the research proposal within the original timeline. So again, to return to Ilioki's notion of project time, the agency followed the understanding that, you know, the project time is kind of invariant and independent of context. That all time is equal, and you know, the fact that there's a pandemic out there does not necessarily matter when it comes to meeting the targets.
And doing field work.
Doing field work or doing all kinds of other work, or is it like people who did not have access to the labs and things like that. So the pandemic did not matter. And of course, again, and the pandemic did not affect everyone equally. Again, they have to talk about this, how the ways that academic precarity is gendered, and how people with caretaking responsibilities do not meet these kind of highly individualized research ideal standards. So we can, let's move on. And then, and this part is kind of really inspired in many ways by Asli's and Aysuda's work and our conversation, in terms of challenging the project life. You know, no, it's not that everyone kind of just submits to the power and does not question it. And here
We submit to the power, but we
still question it, and it does not necessarily. And in the Latvian context, it plays out, I think, in very interesting ways. And your work really made me kind of start thinking about it in those terms. So, so the moments of this project life in Latvia that I have described so far do not mean that the institutional power is never challenged. For instance, one of my interlocutors described in detail how his cohort of recipients of a certain grant had managed to challenge and negotiate with the government agency tasked with overseeing the distribution of the project funding. He stressed that the agency and researchers had a common goal, that everyone was interested in the projects to succeed. And for instance, he said, oh, once we achieved, you know, as a group of scholars, who had received the grant in the same year, once we achieved that, we didn't have to write this popular science report that no one ever reads. It's just absurd. In fact, the time could be spent more meaningfully. I wanted to make the process more efficient, leaving more time for people like you and me and all the other researchers to do science. You know, the kind of thinking to solidarities and doing something that requires their own time, but investing this time negotiating with the agency to kind of help the future grant recipients and so on. But again, the scholars who do speak up openly, however, tend to be kind of ones with, let's say, a certain visibility in the country's research landscape and a comparative employment stability. and or those who are not necessarily rooted in the country, or those who are not necessarily averse to working outside academia. So, these protests do.
They're not as vulnerable.
Yeah, they're not as vulnerable, but it kind of brings out this notion that there are these vulnerabilities involved. And then a lovely ethnographic vignette. Yes, looking on. Yes. So as I mentioned before, this kind of academic and research work is fragmented in Latvia. There's no tenure system in the country. And the Ministry of Education and Science, with input from various local stakeholders, as well as the World Bank that I mentioned before, is currently working on the development of a new academic kind of career framework. So as part of this process, several stakeholder discussions have been taking place over the past few years, and with various organizations sharing their perspectives on what the new model should look like. And during one such meeting in the spring of last year, representatives of an early career researcher organization presented the model envisioned by the board and members of the organization. That is what we may call early career academics in Latvia. Their vision focused on the importance of stability, the introduction of a stable tenure system, secure financing, full-time positions, the importance of both research and teaching, and support for the academic workforce. As the spokesperson said, if there is loss of productivity, the researcher should get help, not be thrown out. So again, kind of thinking about the larger picture. And to highlight issues witnessed in the Latvian research system, the organization's spokesperson brought up their own example. They said, I was just offered an assistant professor position with a 5% workload. The uncertainty. You have a title, but in reality, you have nothing. We do not know whether we will have a permanent job and pay. When I think about a career in Latvia, the only thing that comes to mind are projects, but project that is not sustainable. So again, an early career.
What do you mean 5% workload?
So it's not the full time, not 100%, a 5%. So imagine yeah.
So you should receive.
So you get the, so basically what
5%
they were
of the salary?
saying, yes, it basically means that you have a.
You just have a title but no money.
Yes.
Are you surprised?
Yeah, but I mean, that it is like 5%. Just
There are
no
zero contacts in the UK.
Yeah, I mean,
zero.
Yeah, but this is supposedly you have like a permanent job, right? I'm on paper.
Okay,
They-
we
they-
will have time to
Yeah,
decide.
yeah, No, I was just trying to understand what 5%.
So much, we
I was just trying to figure out what the 5% meant. I thought maybe I misheard it, but yeah, of course not. Of course.
That's what it
They're
is.
very
And that's what
creative in
makes
exploitation.
That's the absurdity that this person was
That
trying to highlight. You said, that you are offering me this title, and this title will probably do something good for the research institution where this person works. It may, look good when this person is applying for project funding, but it does not come with stability, does not come with the livable salary and so on. So the discussion followed the presentation. You can move to the next slide. With the other participants in the conversation, trying to wrap their heads around the framework offered by this kind of early career researchers organization, and suggesting that basically their response was, the implementation of these suggestions would require transforming completely the current financing model and would require additional resources. So basically, it's not doable. And two responses struck me in particular here, and both were voiced by senior academics. And one of them was, we are moving towards a world that is increasingly dominated by uncertainty. It is surprising that the young ones want certainty. And the young ones in Latvia in this word it's kind of neutral, but in this context,
non-tenancy.
Yeah, but it's also kind of, you're the young ones, you're not. As you talked about this idea, this notion of of early career researchers and infantilization that comes with it, and the young ones are indeed people in their 30s and early 40s. So the young ones are.
Yeah, I don't think stability when you're 80. Yeah. You remind me to talk about early career.
And the other remark made by an equally accomplished academic from a different institution stated that their organization, and you can see the quote on their screens, is that those who apply for projects, they're competitive, they're applying for 2 projects a week, and German researchers would not survive in our system. So basically, we are doing things, we have more hardcore, we have internalized the system, and we're playing the game better than those who came up with the system.
Better meaning more brutal.
More brutal, more productive. Yeah.
Are these researchers expected to teach as well? Is all this project application having to go on while they're teaching or the 2 caps?
No, it's research positions, because I think Maria Ivancheva has talked about it in her work about how teaching is being devalued in this kind of current academic landscape, and outsourced and devalued, and how the most value is seen in research, because the research is what will bring us create value and bring basically money.
People come into the university I work at, Northumbria. They come in as researchers, but they get dragged into teaching, and before they know it, they're spending so many hours teaching that they can't do any research or apply for research. Oh,
yeah, it's all yeah. So what I wanted to kind of show with this exchange is how, on one hand, groups of researchers, and in this case, these early career scholars in particular, experience uncertainty and perceive the kind of omnipresent project format as curtailing research work. And on the other hand, it also reveals the extent to which the project life, with all this kind of project specificities, with the local specificities and compounded insecurities, have been kind of naturalized and even seen as point of pride in the Latvian research context. And then maybe kind of going back to the scholar whose quote I brought up in the very beginning of the paper about the one who's kind of trying to compound income because he's uncertain about what's going to happen in a year and a half. Had another conversation. He talked about how, again, senior scholars in his institution do not understand why he would even want to get a more stable position, because for them, really the source of pride is in the successful grant applications. The suffering, but the suffering that comes with results. The successful grant application that results.
By the way, I was reaching out to change the name. You can change the name to Ieva Puzo.
Oh, it's
so that people.
Yeah.
Actually, 2 people in one mind. But
and then,
so I change.
We can change. It's more moving toward the kind of concluding. Again, concluding ethnographic vignette and maybe suggestions that I mentioned in the beginning that may be more applicable and doable for anthropologists. So I will kind of conclude with an ethnographic moment here. So I participated in a fantastic academic writing workshop. I did it twice. So after the first workshop, I was kind of really inspired by the organizers' focus on creative approach to writing, the kind of generosity in reading other work. I was super inspired, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do this workshop again. And the first time around, I had submitted the paperwork incorrectly. Basically, my mistake was that I paid for the workshop, and then I somehow thought that it would be easy to get reimbursed for it. I was chastised for it, and I was like, okay, next time I'm going to do things correctly. and doing things correctly, filling out one form after another. The entire process basically took longer than the 8-week writing workshop. And, there are contracts being drawn and, documents shipped across the Atlantic Ocean and things like that. And, the workshop had really finished by then. And I kept asking the workshop organizers if they, had received the payment. And the last time we talked, they had indeed received the money transfer along with a polite request to sign the contract again on an A4 size paper instead of the North American equivalent of the A4, there's like a letter size. Basically it's like a couple of millimeters difference. I'm not sure whether they did it or not. So basically, if not for this paper and the kind of larger article that this paper is part of, this vignette would never have seen the light of day. I would have, in a written form. I would have, shared it with colleagues, and I have done it on several occasions. Over coffee, with amusement, frustration, a sense of guilt, mainly toward these workshop organizers, and some sparks of anxiety as well, because it's always there. This anxiety is always there. And, anthropologists are quick to discuss fieldwork trials and tribulations in their ethnographic writing, and yet this kind of employment conditions under which the research was carried out usually remains out of the picture, and encounters with the unknown and the kind of ethnographic surprises are there in this writing, but not the terms of employment under which they came to be. And I think that's something that we may try to kind of incorporate more in our writing. Not in the project proposals, but maybe the texts that come after that. Even apart from those scholars who conduct research and academic work, anthropologists do reflect on their personal experiences with precarity and projectification in all kinds of formats. And in addition, we can glimpse some insights from the funding and acknowledgement sections of research articles where the information about the funding source is neatly listed. Otherwise, it would not, the publication may not count. As well as sometimes from about the author paragraphs, these glimpses about where and how we're employed, we may get some glimpses, but they're not necessarily spelled out and discussed and framed in the articles themselves. So we do not necessarily see the researcher's project life in the same publications. The rush to have everything finished by project deadlines, the kind of power dynamics in large team projects also, and uncertainty and anxiety about the future, that comes with writing these texts, that you have to keep producing these texts and you have to keep publishing them in the right database, in the right journals, and so on. And again, so I think as anthropologists, we are kind of well placed to challenge the project form, maybe, but explicitly talking about our work, joking about the project form, about our employment conditions in the article that we're writing, because we have this tradition of reflection, of autoethnography, these kinds of, we have this tradition to which we can compound and to which we can add on. And maybe by weaving into the stories that we tell, by revealing this kind of often anxiety-filled background of, our encounters with the unknown, maybe we can do make a small difference. Cautiously. I'm very, very cautious about.
Right, no, about that. We can be a kind of prize for that.
Yeah.
Part anthropology chapter.
Yeah, so I think, the caution, you all heard the caution. The caution is there.
Thank you so much. That's a really,
Did you,
I can stop sharing.
so, Eva, thank you so much for this very somber, realistic, presentation about, focusing on the, case of Latvia, but actually it's now so universalized. It's so familiar to every one of us. It's also ethnographic, but it tells, this is your story. Basically, okay, no more Mars.
Not Latvia,
Yeah. It's a
So
global.
every-
Yeah. It's very-
everywhere. It's everywhere.
Mhm. It's the same.
And where, the next part of this section is where do we go from here? And following from what you've just given us, what about the production of another right-which book, but as a collection of autoethnographic articles or chapters on experiences of academic precarity. That would be a nice way of rounding off the launch of the one book with establishing we could establish just from what you say a need for and the way I'm teaching autoethnography among my second students. But it's a particularly good way of revealing knowledge that otherwise would not get.
No, it's not. Yeah, I think, so, yeah. Yes, so I'll moderate this session. So thank you, Eva, and, so basically focusing on the question of Latvia in the context of EU and in the global north, the story is very familiar to all of us, obviously. Project, and since you've mentioned Graeber, I wanted to talk about his later work on bullshitization of academia, and I don't think he had the time to develop it as much as he would like to, unfortunately. But basically, what you describe is such a good case of that, where one person is doing research and we've created jobs for 5 people to monitor that research, and all those 5 people actually have stable incomes and jobs, like they have salaried positions. But the person who makes all of those jobs possible, the person who's doing the basic research, does not actually have a proper salaried full-time position. And it is structured specifically in this way. And what we find over time is that a lot of researchers find that they're much better off if they just leave academia, these project-based academic jobs, and switch to the dark side and become the administrators, because there are jobs for administrators, and there's all this talk about not having enough, as you said, qualified labor in academia. But in fact, the reality is there are not enough jobs, salaried positions, as is the case whenever they talk about labor shortage. There's never labor shortage. There's just a shortage of proper jobs that people are willing to work at. So I want to open the floor to questions to Eva, and then, yes, Asli, please.
Ieva, thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I was looking forward to it, and it was like everything that I imagined we would be talking about it more. Thanks a lot for this. Well, I know that anthropologists are, more interested in mapping out the personal experiences and the specificities of each experience. And as a sociologist, I'm countering it with generalizations of these narratives. Like I look at the convergences of these narratives and look at the pattern that they actually spell out. And in light of this, I would like to ask you, like, do you see a common pattern in all these stories with regards to the academic career structure? What kind of a development do you see in the academic career structure proceeding at the moment? Like, because traditionally we had this secure unilinear path in the academic career structure that was prevalent up until the last quarter of the 20th century, maybe, and it started to change. And right now we are talking about precarity, we are talking about projectification, and fixed term contracts and so on and so forth. And we have numbers that actually show that this tenured linear career path is becoming a rarity. So what kind of a pattern do you see in all these narratives? In which direction are we heading in the academic career structure?
It's so difficult because again, thinking from
Nowhere good, that's for sure.
like let's say in the context of Latvia, so yes, project funding, the major emphasis on that, these fixed term contracts that come with project funding, or basically you create, when you have funding, you create a position for yourself, you attach yourself to an institution. At the same time, in the Latvian context, there are universities, there are institutions that are trying to establish the tenure track system.
Right.
So I think again, I'm speaking about the Latvian context only. I think there this kind of search for the model that may work, and this model may be very, very. These inequalities will definitely continue. They're not going to disappear. Because, for instance, I'm looking at these announcements for these tenure track positions. They are, again, the main task that you're supposed to be doing, you are supposed to be applying for. You're supposed to be creating your research team and applying for projects and competitive international projects. It has to be international. You have to be part of this kind of global excellence and global research landscape. So this idea that you have to be globally competitive is there. And I think that this will, for a while, drive the way that the administrators who are the ones, it's not the researchers, right? The administrators who will be coming up with new ways and new models to kind of enact this global excellence, global competitiveness as they see it. And then the whatever model comes is basically just used as means to theoretically achieve this excellence, which we know it's not a sustainable model. I think it's not the sustainable model. I'm just not sure as to when when the collapse is gonna happen.
Well, the world is about to collapse.
Yeah.
Everything.
I don't wait for the others.
Because no, I just wanted to add, because when I started this project that I was kind of talking about, this project on international scholars and their experiences, and it was a comparative project and all the things, I really thought that Latvia was in a place where we could come up with new models and new ways of thinking, that we do not necessarily have to follow the structures and systems that come from the centers of global production, that if there was a little bit of imagination or some kind of strive or drive or interest in that, there could be ways that in the margins, in these edges, as Agata mentioned in the previous talk, in the previous part of the session, that in these edges, like great things could, maybe new models could maybe be established, but I don't necessarily see it happening. I had a hope when I started, I had a hope at this point.
And they killed your home.
Well, I see you. I just want to say one thing. This reminds me of like Rosa Luxemburg's, how she describes how capital had to and, did, travel to colonized parts of the world. It was part of the, logic of capitalism. But because once we've capitalized, turned academia into this capitalist venture, I don't think there can be any place for margins. Its goal is to spread and to take over as much as possible. It takes on this same logic of capitalism as it does in every other sector, it feels like. So where we hope there'll be some more, like some space, it finds it before we do.